V. The Hierophant. Dear Princess Twilight, please find attached the first biannual report on Cozy Glow's progress over the past 6 months. For brevity, I have abridged the main details of the report here. Cozy Glow continues to excel in her studies, much to my delight. While a full breakdown of her present knowledge and standing is laboriously compiled in the main report, it is suffice to say that if she continues to maintain this level of progression, I may have to move her predicted date of graduation forwards once again. I have already begun to arrange for her to sit the exams required to receive a diploma in higher full education, which she will likely be able to take a few months before her 14th birthday, over 4 years earlier than most. She remains healthy, eats regularly, and maintains herself well. Her demeanor is, overall, usually cheerful, though she can be stubborn at times, and occasionally lashes out at her tutors and guards. She is also quick to express remorse and make amends. After considerable effort, I was able to arrange for her to spend some time socializing with fillies her own age, namely the daughters of some of the royal guard. Cozy engaged well with her peers, though expressed a suspicion that the fillies had been ordered to show her insincere amiability. Given her stellar academic performance, positive outlook on the future, and generally pleasant disposition, after much careful consideration, I decided to relax the restrictions on her security once again, pending your personal approval. The new arrangements are, as always, detailed in full in the report, but I will summarize them here for your benefit. From the times of 9 in the morning to 6 in the afternoon, Cozy will have the freedom to travel around Canterlot unescorted. She will not be allowed to leave the castle outside of these hours, except where she is accompanied. The purpose of this is to further foster her independence from my authority, and to show her the benefits of living life as a law-abiding citizen. Encouraging further responsibility is a major part of my strategy moving forward. After much persuading, Starlight Glimmer has agreed to allow Cozy to tutor a select group of students from the School of Friendship, and hopes the workload will further ease her transition towards independence. In return, she will receive a small monthly allowance, and will be allowed to spend it as she sees fit. I will provide the allowance out of my own finances. I await your assessment of these recommendations. I recognize your schedule will likely be full at the moment, especially with the recent events in Yakyakistan, but if possible, I would like to schedule a meeting in the coming weeks to discuss a personal matter. Please advise me of your availability. Your faithful student, Luster Dawn. Luster watched the scroll vaporize in a puff of magical energy, letting out a breath she felt like she had been holding for the past 20 minutes, and closed her eyes. Cozy Glow groaned and slammed her head into the table, causing the pot of ink she'd been writing from to shake violently and teeter precariously, back and forth, before settling down again. Squinting through bleary eyes at the parchment in front of her, her stomach clenched as she realized she had to present the half-baked lesson to her pupils tomorrow afternoon. Who knew teaching basic alchemy could be so hard? Though she was apprehensive about the new responsibilities resting upon her shoulders, the newfound freedom they came with more than made up for it. Being free to walk the streets of Canterlot wherever and whenever she pleased was something she'd wanted ever since Luster had first taken her outside the castle. The enchanted glass pendant Luster had given her still hung beneath a notch nailed into the wall. She hadn't yet found the courage to leave the castle without it, and didn't plan to any time soon. Not that she was scared, of course. She just preferred a quiet life. Above the pendant was a motivational poster she'd purchased at a gift shop. A small cat clinging desperately to a tree branch. Beneath it, written in a bold, freeform font, "Hang in there."
Base metal is to noble metal as light is to.
Cozy ground her teeth together, searching for the right word.
Dark? No, that's not right.
What would teaching be like? What would the students think of her? A chill ran down her spine as she realized none of them would have even been born before she'd been stopped. What if one of them was the offspring of a pony she'd known? Her blood froze at the very thought. She'd known a lot of beings at the School of Friendship, many of whom no doubt had young of their own, full age, even. The prospect seemed more likely than not. She fought hard to clamp down on the panic rising within her. Starlight would have carefully selected her students in advance. There was no way she'd have sent any pony, any creature she had any kind of connection to. Quashing the rising tide of fear and doubt that threatened to overcome her, she pored over the lesson plan, quill flying back and forth between her teeth, sending tiny iridescent flecks of ink flying, peppering her snout with black specks. After nearly an hour had passed, she collapsed back in her chair and spat the quill out. The lesson was a little rough around the edges, but it would do for a first attempt. Of course, writing a lesson was one thing. Presenting, it was a whole other challenge. Public speaking might be one of her fortes, but she wasn't used to playing an authority figure. Where to even begin? Ambling over to the full-body mirror that lined her wardrobe, she tried a smile. It was good, sure, but it was more cute than friendly. When she stopped widening her eyes, it looked far better. In fact, she shouldn't bare her teeth so much. A closed smile gave her expression an edge of authority.
Hello, every creature. My name's Cozy Glow, and I'll...
She stopped, frowning. Why introduce herself? All of Equestria already knew who she was.
I'll be tutoring you all for the next couple of months. Now, I know you already know who I am, but I'm afraid I don't know any of your names. Why don't we go around the classroom, and every pony, every creature, can say their name and something interesting about themselves.
A grin spread across her face as the mask dropped. Not bad. Not bad at all, especially for an ad-lib. Admittedly, her material was mostly ripped straight from the teachers she'd had at school, but every pony had to draw inspiration from somewhere. Next, she tried a stern expression. By shifting her face around just a little, she was able to transform her go-to evil leer into a disapproving grimace.
I'd like you to at least try to take this lesson seriously. This is your last chance. I'm not going to be putting up with any more behavior like this. Misbehave one more time, and you'll be out of my class.
She couldn't stop herself from letting out a snort of laughter at how serious her voice sounded. After that, she tried a caring expression. Then an excited one. Then a motivational one. It was an old game, one she'd played countless times in the mirror as a young filly, trying to see how convincing she could make her responses. She'd gotten pretty good, all things considered.
Your Highness?
The guard bowed as low as he could, his snout all but resting on the floor. Twilight glanced behind him, her gentle smile tightening slightly as she realized who her audience was.
Luster.
The mare could feel her heart pounding in her chest as droplets of sweat began to perspire on her forehead, but she fought to keep her voice under control. She could not, however, stop the waver of fear in her tone as her princess stared down at her with those kind, gentle eyes that barely masked the iron gaze behind them. In the past few months, she and Twilight had only grown further and further apart. It was becoming painfully obvious that neither of them really wanted anything to do with one another.
Princess.
The two mares stared silently at each other across the throne room. It was Twilight's voice that first cut across the deafening silence.
How goes your studies? I've heard nothing since your last letter. 2 weeks ago. Your little list of suggestions. I thought I'd already made it clear. Cozy Glow's security is your responsibility. You don't need me to approve anything.
The words were cutting, but Luster pushed them aside, determined not to rise to the challenge.
I understand. I merely wished to keep you abreast of Cozy Glow's circumstances. I also wanted to get your personal opinion on her progress.
Twilight looked away, sifting through a stack of parchment in a feeble attempt to appear disinterested.
I have more pressing matters on my mind than any single filly. If you have nothing of any real importance to discuss with me, then please leave.
Lester's eyelid twitched slightly.
Her progress is the basis of my independent program of study. Your protégé. I would think that would be of interest to you. All of which is summed up quite nicely in the door-stopping report you've provided. There is no need for a viva. You're making good progress. I'm certain you'll be progressing on to the next level of study without a hitch.
Lester took a deep breath.
That was the other thing I wanted to talk about. What about it?
Twilight looked back at her, interest recaptured.
You think you need more time? No. Actually, I wanted to talk about my future. About our future. I don't think it was any secret I had planned to study further under you, once my work with Cozy was concluded. You had.
Twilight left a pause between the two words.
But I've spent a lot of time with Cozy, and I've had a lot of time to think over the past few months. I don't need to tell you how bright she is, her capacity for greatness, but you and I both know she'd be unlikely to find any institution willing to take her on. No teacher willing to educate her. Except me.
Twilight was silent as Lester continued.
I can't juggle a full-time study program and a personal student at the same time. So, there's no easy way to say this, but I'm not going to be able to remain your protégé. I'm going to take on the task of Cozy's full-time education.
Another blanket of silence descended upon the room. Twilight's expression could have been carved from stone. Her face was totally unreadable. After nearly a minute of quiet, Lester took a tentative step forward.
Princess?
Twilight opened her mouth, before glancing at the guards standing at attention by the doorway.
A moment of privacy between me and my student.
The guards dutifully filed out of the room. Twilight's horn lit up, sending out a lyrical bell chime that echoed across the room, forging a magical seal around the doors. No noise could come in or out. It was the same enchantment she had used when she had freed Cozy Glow from her stone tomb, 1,000 years ago. The alicorn rose to her hooves and stared down emotionlessly at Lester, who couldn't help but squirm under her piercing gaze. Twilight studied her for a few seconds more before speaking.
Do you care for this filly, Lester?
Lester paused. Every nerve in her body was screaming at her to think very carefully before she spoke a single word.
Of course. I want to see her talents recognized. Don't you? I have seen her talents recognized, some 24 years ago, when she brought this land to submission with the aid of a demon and a changeling queen. But I will confess, at the time, I thought my mentor's punishment too severe. I believed punishment should be rehabilitative, not punitive.
Her voice was dull, listless, almost bored.
I intended to right this wrong, and in doing so, I intended to aid in your studies. For the most part, you exceeded my expectations, as always. But you have also grown more stubborn, more insistent. Your concern for her well-being has clouded your judgment.
She sighed.
You will change your mind in due time. I am sure of it. When Cozy has graduated.
She nodded slowly, trying to convince herself.
In due course, you'll see your error. I won't.
Lester bristled at the callous way Twilight brushed everything she'd just said aside.
No matter what, Cozy will need a teacher. I promised her I'd be there for her. Enough.
There was an unmistakable edge to Twilight's voice.
I have enough to worry about as things stand, and I have no time for this argument. Do not bring this matter up ever again.
Her horn ignited, letting out another bell chime. Royal guards filed back into the room, snapping to attention as they entered.
Kindly escort my student back to her chambers.
Twilight turned away, hiding her face. Lester's blood boiled as she felt a guard's hoof land on her shoulders. For a moment, she considered fighting back, but decided against it. Cozy needed her, and she wouldn't be any use locked up in a jail cell. Holding her head high, she turned tail and left. He was waiting for her before she even arrived. Twilight did a good job of disguising her surprise, but she could still see his grin broaden at the flash of alarm in her eyes.
Good evening, Princess. Something on your mind? If you're going to say, "I told you so," then you'd better do it now.
Discord yawned, stretching his arms wide, exuding an air of relaxation she sorely envied.
I'm not one for such petty point scoring. My condolences on the loss of your student. I understand you and Luster were very close. Dare I ask how you were able to eavesdrop? I was under the impression my cloaking incantation was inviolable. Oh, it is. I spend a great deal of time in your throne room. I just prefer to be less visible. Wouldn't want my presence to put any creature off.
Twilight rested her forelegs on the railing, eyes scanning the glittering outline of Canterlot.
I'm in no mood for games tonight. Discord. As ever. And I'm to take it you won't be entertaining any advice. Either? If this is about Cozy, then I'll remind you she's made excellent progress. Every fear you've had about her has been unfounded. So far.
The Draconiquus muttered to himself.
Even after Cozy drives a wedge between you and your student, you'll defend her. Luster is able to make her own decisions. I'm sure she'll change her mind.
Twilight's voice wavered slightly.
And if she doesn't? Then.
Twilight swallowed the lump rising in her throat.
Then I was wrong. She would not be suited for the throne at all.
Silence, and the only sound left was that of the wind whistling in the distance. Its muffled roar echoed in the shaking of thousands of window panes, trees and wind chimes. Those glowing yellow eyes never flickered, eyeing Twilight keenly in the darkness, watching intently for her next move. Twilight sighed and leaned back.
Do you think? Am I doing a good job?
Discord chuckled, a dry, mirthless rasp that gave nothing away.
It wouldn't be any fun if I were to take sides, would it? Strange. I could almost recall a time when you stood beside me to save Equestria. And I may once again, but I'm not one of your advisors. Princess, if I wanted to guide equestrian policy, I wouldn't need your permission. All of my reign, my greatest fear is that I would leave my country with no heir.
She faltered.
I'm getting older. I know it. I'm not like Celestia or Luna, am I?
She glanced upwards at Discord.
You know, don't you? You must.
For a few seconds, Discord didn't move. Then, an almost imperceptible nod.
Much of history is lost, except to those who remember it. Hard times offered many the opportunity to prove their worth. I knew many alicorns before the royal sisters, and none lived as long as they did. Few even outlived their friends.
Twilight could feel her legs shaking underneath her, and leaned further onto the railing, in an attempt to steady herself.
How long? I'm not a fortune-teller. I have no idea. A healthy mare your age could expect to live 3, maybe 4 more decades. Enough time to select a new heir, I'm sure.
Twilight ground her teeth together, an iron determination suppressing the fear and doubt bubbling within her.
Luster will come around.
She had to have wasted a precious decade preparing her for the throne. It was unthinkable.
I doubt it.
Twilight could have sworn she heard a soft mocking tone in Discord's voice.
She seemed determined to give that filly a good education. You know, when I cautioned you against this little pet project, even I didn't foresee this turn of events.
He leaned in, amber eyes brimming with zeal.
You didn't listen then. Listen, now. If you don't act, Equestria will be left heirless, broken, adrift. It will be the perfect environment for somebody like her to seize control. Celestia anticipated threats before they even arose. If you wish to be a princess of her stature, you must do the same.
Twilight stiffened.
I will not punish a foal because of what she might do, especially not one that has made such stellar progress. Then what are you going to do?
Twilight grimaced.
I have an idea. Hello, every creature.
The class stared in rapture at their teacher, who teetered back and forth on the stool she was perched atop in order to see over the wooden desk. Starlight had told her to expect 5 students, but only 4 creatures were seated in front of her. 2 ponies, a griffin and a yak. As she watched, the mouth of the yak literally dropped. Trying to disguise how much the situation unnerved her, Cozy flew into the air and began to write on the chalkboard, tongue curling at the taste of chalk in her mouth.
My name is Cozy Gao, and today we'll be looking at K2, alchemy.
The sound of the chalk splintering against the ground was fully audible in the silent classroom.
Oh, for the love of Finin, let's get it over with.
Cozy Glow landed on her desk and glared at the class, doing her best to look stern but not threatening.
Yes, I'm Cozy Glow. Yes, your parents probably remember when I was all evil and tried to take over Equestria. But that was a long time ago, and I've changed. Are there any other questions?
2 hooves and a claw shot into the air. The yak said nothing, apparently still too stunned to react.
Any questions actually relevant to this class?
2 hooves fell. The griffin kept her claw in the air. Cozy glanced down at the register she'd been given.
Yes. Gloria? Did you really know Tarek? I asked for questions relevant to this class.
The icy tone in Cozy's voice caused the teenage griffin to shrink back into her seat.
It is relevant. Every creature knows Tarek had a philosopher's stone he used to soak up magic. What?
Cozy groaned.
No. Everything about that is wrong.
The griffin blinked, before lowering her gaze, clearly embarrassed.
Oh, sorry. The Philosopher's Stone is an artifact that may be used to turn, or transmute, base metals into refined metals, like gold, silver, and platinum. You should all be writing this down.
There was a flurry of motion as the class scrabbled for quills, ink pots, and parchment. When the fuss had settled, Cozy continued.
I see we're missing some creature. 1. Sugar Gem. Is she absent today?
The yak spoke for the first time, his voice disarmingly cordial and totally unsuited to his behemoth frame.
He's always late. Give him 5 minutes.
Cozy cringed at her mistake, but that didn't stop her from tutting disapprovingly. She could hardly believe the creatures in this class were supposed to be her age.
We'll see about that. Let me see. Elijah, I assume? And that would make you 2.
She ran her eyes over the 2 colts she had yet to attach a name to.
Skybuster and Steelhazen.
As she said each name, a colt raised a hoof to identify himself.
Good. Well, while we wait, why don't we go around in a circle and every creature?
The door creaked open, and a tall, thin, snow-white unicorn colt with neatly combed indigo-blue hair slunk in. As he stared around the classroom, Cozy fixed him with her best disapproving look.
Sugar Gem, I presume. Late to your first lesson.
He looked just as thrown as the other students to see her, but mercifully he simply lowered his head, muttered an apology, and settled down in the nearest seat. Even when he was seated, he studied her intently from behind his light purple eyes, as if unable to believe what they were seeing. Cozy returned to the front of the class and cleared her throat.
Well, let's not waste any more time. Please turn to page 10 of the books provided. Today's lecture will be all about prima materia, the base material for the construction of the Philosopher's Stone. It was over 3,000 years ago that who became the first pony to define the key characteristics of base metals, which are, of course.
The sound of a bell ringing cut her rambling short. In fact, she was only halfway through the lesson she'd prepared.
Oh. Dismissed, I guess.
There was another rush of activity as her students fought to collect their bags and notes, and escape before Cozy could start handing out homework. One by one, they muttered their goodbyes and slipped out the door. Within seconds, The classroom was empty, and Cozy was alone. All things considered, her first lesson had gone quite well. She'd had to slow down a few times, and Elijah hadn't stopped asking questions once, but she'd enjoyed herself, nonetheless. Gathering her belongings into the leather saddlebags she'd spent most of her first allowance upon, she left the classroom and made for the exit. The sun had begun to set, sending amber rays of light through the school windows and illuminating the hallways in their soft orange glow. She still had a few hours before she had to be back at the castle. Maybe she should go and get something to eat.
Oof!
Cozy stumbled backwards, hastily steadying herself with a few flaps of her wings. The pony she'd walked into wasn't so fortunate, and collapsed in a heap in front of her. Cozy's stomach dropped as she realized who it was.
Starlight. Oh, I'm so sorry. Here.
She extended a wing and helped pull Starlight to her hooves. The principal eyed her with poorly disguised suspicion, but nodded her thanks nonetheless.
That's all right. Just an accident. It's good to see you, Cozy. How was your first lesson? Huh? Oh, great. Great students. Very attentive.
Starlight brushed herself down, simultaneously fixing her mane with her horn.
I'm glad to hear that. I didn't have time to approve the students myself, but Quillstrip, my secretary, always comes through.
She grimaced.
I promised Twilight I would, but I've a lot on my plate right now. I hope you understand.
Cozy Glow waved a hoof as if it was the most casual thing in the world.
Oh, don't even worry about it. They were all great.
Starlight gave her a tight smile.
Well, I should probably get back to.
She nodded pointedly at the hallway.
Oh, of course. Sorry for keeping you. Goodbye.
Cozy finished pathetically. Starlight nodded kindly and walked past her. Cozy watched her leave, quietly wishing the ground would rise up and swallow her whole. Somewhere in the back on her mind, she realized that must have been the first time Starlight had seen her in 2 decades, and she hadn't aged at all. All of this was probably just as surreal to her as it was to Cozy. Pacing silently through the school corridor, Cozy found herself following a familiar route, one she'd walked 1,000 times before. Blinking as she stepped out of the main entrance into the intense sun, she saw a familiar face by the school gate. Sugar Gem was talking to a mare who somehow felt familiar. As she approached, she recognized her. The similarities were unmistakable. She'd only ever known a few mares with that alabaster coat. How could she not have made the connection sooner? She must be his mother. It had, after all, been 24 years. Ponies had moved on, grown older, had foals of their own. Fate, once again, was laughing at her. The mare was listening intently to her colt talk, brow furrowed in confusion and shock. As she watched, Cozy caught the eye of Sugar Gem, feeling her heart leap as he turned and pointed in her direction. His mother's gaze followed and landed squarely on her. Sweetie Belle's eyes widened until they all but bulged in their sockets. Cozy considered approaching her, introducing herself, but before she could even figure out how to open that conversation, Sweetie grabbed her colt and strode away, not looking back once. It was a reaction Cozy had half expected, but it didn't make her feel any better. All of a sudden, she didn't want to eat. She just wanted to go home. With her heart in her hooves, she let out a deep sigh and took off, bound for Canterlot Castle. End of chapter.